Today's program is being brought to you by SunsetLakeCBD.com. We've talked about these guys a lot. They're located up in Vermont outside of Burlington. They started they had a farm that was a dairy farm that was providing milk for Ben and Jerry's at one point, maybe still. And they decided to start to grow some hemp, and they worked with the University of Vermont for some regenerative agricultural practices. They're 100% pesticide free. They only use organic fertilizers. They have great business practices, $15 a minimum wage. Their company is predominantly employee owned. And I got one of the nicest notes from them the other day. It was unbelievable. They sent me some Vermont maple syrup. They are one of my favorite advertisers on this program. They are real movement folks. They, it was a couple of young folks who started this business, and our audience I'm not literally eating this stuff up, although you can with the gummy bears. But folks are loving it. Around these parts, we were all CBD skeptics. I had tried the tinctures. I bought it like one of those markets. What is it? Outdoor markets. What is it? Like a flea market. And never was terribly impressed. The tincture I use from Sunset Lake CBD, they have a 750 mil, they have a 1500 mil, and they have a 3000 mil. And it is helping me sleep at a time of great anxiety. I don't know if you're aware of what's going on in the world these days, but it has been incredibly helpful. They also have a wonderful CBD infused coffee, which is always my weekend coffee. They have, like I mentioned before, these great gummy bears that have CBD in them. And I'm a big user of their salve that has 500 milligrams of CBD and has arnica in it. And I use it primarily for me. I use it for now my knee, but also my eczema, which no one else seems to have any record of having success with it, but I've had success with it. But I've had a lot of people write into the show saying it's been great for their arthritis. I gave it to a buddy for his back when he had shingles. Everyone I know has some type of ailment. It's really nice. And Matt is a big fan of their smokables.
Yeah, I was, above CBD for the longest time until I found, particularly their smalls, which are tiny little nuggets that you can put right in your grinder. Very easy to fit.
You get 20% off with the coupon code Left Is Best. One word, Left Is Best, at SunsetLakeCBD.com. Check it out.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Tuesday, September 29th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, so excited. Sterling Professor of American History, the director of the Gelder Lerman Center, a study of slavery, resistance, and abolition at Yale, Professor David Blight, on Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, and going to be talking to him about the Second American Revolution. Also on the program tonight, it's the first presidential debate. Takes place with Joe Biden up in a recent poll in the swing state of Pennsylvania. And it also takes place in the context of Donald Trump. Taxes being released showing that he pays no taxes and that he owes a ton of money. Meanwhile, the world death toll tops 1 million people as Fauci rings the alarm bell in this country. We are over 40,000 new cases a day. A leaked database of voter profiles shows that the Trump campaign targeted millions of black voters through Facebook to suppress their votes in 2016. Meanwhile, new report shows CDC played down risks of reopening schools as an NBC reporter catches Redfield talking in an airport about what a joke Donald Trump's new coronavirus advisor is. Meanwhile, the Democrats unveil a second bite at the apple with a $2.2 trillion coronavirus relief bill. And is Nebraska's 2nd district the most important House race in the country? Meanwhile, California now set to make generic insulin and other generic drugs. Wilbur Ross set to disregard a federal judge's ruling that he should continue counting for the sake of the census. And New York sees a surge in bankruptcies. Meanwhile, nationally, thousands of aviation layoffs loom. All this and more on today's program. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. I think I've mentioned to you folks in the past that over the past year or so, maybe more, I don't know. I've lost complete count of time in this coronavirus era. So it could have been, 3 years ago for all I know. I don't know. But I think it was basically a year and a half. Maybe Brendan would know because Brendan was the one who suggested to me that I listen to David Blight's, like, what is it? A 15-hour? Is it
a lecture series? It's one of the classes at Yale that he teaches, I believe. And
it is on the Civil War through Reconstruction, and it fundamentally changed my perspective on all this on the Civil War, but also Reconstruction. I mean, Eric Foner did too, but Blight really sort of put it into context for me. I don't know what it is. Maybe when I hear things, it's better for me. So this is a real treat for me. And of course, we have the first presidential debate taking place tonight between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And this will take place at 9:30 p.m. or is it 9 p.m.? Excuse me. And
9 p.m., yeah.
And I am looking to stream it live. So that is my hope, and I hopefully will be able to get that together. The folks here, Brendan and Kyle, are going to allow me to operate that from the studio. You know, we're living in a different era when everybody's outside of the studio. So I will give that a try tonight. Should also mention tomorrow, obviously on Friday. I missed yesterday because of Yom Kippur. On Friday, or I should say Saturday, Donald Trump made it official that Amy Coney Barrett was going to be his nominee. We're going to be talking to Ellie Mistel tomorrow on the program about her and about what the Democrats can do. They have a limited amount of arrows in their quiver, as it were, to slow the process down. But we should. Chuck Schumer announcing yesterday that he would not be meeting with Amy Coney Barrett because he believes the pick is illegitimate based upon, I guess, the Mitch McConnell rule, as it were. We should also remind you that Amy Coney Barrett sits on the federal judiciary because Mitch McConnell obstructed the judicial picks of Barack Obama, specifically kept a judge from even getting a hearing, I think, in that for that seat, and then subsequently was filled during the Trump administration, during the Trump era, And that's where her judicial experience has come from. I am not one of those people who feel like you need to be a judge in the first place to sit on the Supreme Court. I actually think it would be helpful to have some non-judges on there so that we wouldn't have the veneer that these people are above politics. Of course, they're political. Nevertheless, that's the situation. The debate tonight, if I was advising Joe Biden for the debate tonight, I would basically just keep referring to Donald Trump as the $750 guy. I would just throw it off and then talk about listen, it's not like you're busy paying your taxes. Why don't you actually do something about the coronavirus? That's more or less the attitude I would have the entire night. I wouldn't be talking about much else. Maybe if you spent a little less time primping, you'd have more time to work on the coronavirus. That should be the attitude. Meanwhile, here is Rudy Giuliani going on Fox News today and pitching what he thinks is the winning strategy. Like first it was like Sleepy Joe, then it was like Slow Joe. They can't come up with anything. The entire Senate hearing that they held, which apparently was like their plan A about Hunter Biden, fell apart. It wrapped up the other day. You didn't hear about it? That's because there was nothing there. I mean, we all know there's a certain amount of nepotism and there's a certain amount of like inherent corruption, but they couldn't find anything that they themselves probably weren't guilty of with their own kids. But here is Rudy Giuliani.
The man has dementia. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've talked to doctors. I've had them look at 100 different tapes of his 5 years ago and today.
The Biden people say he's fine.
He can't recite the Pledge of Allegiance and he's fine. He was in the Senate for 160 years. I mean, he can't do the prologue to the Constitution of the United States or the Declaration of Independence, any of them.
Giuliani.
He can't do numbers. Wow, are the numbers screwed up? He actually displays symptoms that two gerontologists told me are classic symptoms of middle-level dementia. Right. That's when he does that. I pledge allegiance to the United States. I think done that twice. Well, that's a classic symptom, and the DSM-5 is the fifth symptom of dementia. He's got 8 of the 10. Look, that isn't the debate. He can get through it. I think the president is quite right to say maybe he's taken Adderall or some kind of attention deficit disorder thing.
And that's why the president wants to do a drug test. But, none of us are doctors.
I'd also check his right pocket.
That's your opinion. But so it will be interesting to see what happens tonight.
Oh, no, it's not just my opinion. It's the opinion of a number of doctors I've actually, interviewed.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court, because that's going to be a topic tonight at the debate.
Of course.
What do we...
Wow. There, at the debriefing after the show today, they're going to be like, maybe we shouldn't be having Rudy back on anymore, because maybe we're actually getting into some type of like, can we get sued for that? Rudy Giuliani is interviewing doctors. What are the chances that he's interviewing doctors, or maybe he's just visiting doctors? It's not inconceivable that Rudy Giuliani is getting confused between what the doctors are saying about Biden and what the doctors are telling him about himself.
Yeah, he's not exactly the best person to do an illustration of Biden misremembering the Declaration of Independence or any sort of, anything, because it just looks like him misremembering.
Right. I mean, why not send out somebody who is non-ancient and is capable of actually putting together a coherent narrative to make that case? They're basically sending out, his argument is, look, it takes one to know one, essentially. And it also seems to me like, why would you do that on the morning of the debate? Because if Biden shows up and is coherent during the debate, he basically has he's completely overperformed the expectations that Rudy Giuliani is setting up for everybody. I don't know. I think that's sort of bizarre, but I'm not in charge of that. And thank goodness. All right. we're going to get a couple of advertisers here, and then we will get to the professor. I'm very excited about it. I've literally gotten 4 IMs during the course of the opening of the show who are so excited. People I have told to listen to Professor Blight's Civil War class. But before we do, you all know that hiring can be a challenging, but ZipRecruiter, as I've told you millions of times before, makes it fast and easy. There's one CEO, Allie, needed to hire for a multifaceted role at his wallpaper company. Walls Need Love. I've never heard of that company. He was looking for someone who was the right fit for his team and culture, but his search was slow going, so he turned to ZipRecruiter. Again, I will remind folks that we also have a story here at the Majority Report. Brendan came to us through ZipRecruiter. Not only does ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology identify the right people for your job, it actively invites them to apply. That's what happened with Brendan. And this is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's how Allie found Savannah Ray. That's how I found Brendan Finn. Allie said Savannah's skills and experience were a great match for the role. I said that Brendan's skills and experience were beyond it. He had already been searching through our YouTube videos for his last job and actually had to block us at one point, I guess, because he wanted it without commentary. So excuse us. But Allie applied, said that Savannah applied within a few days after he posted the job through ZipRecruiter. Allie has hired everyone from his head of marketing to his sales director to his lead graphic designer. But Ali's only got one employer. Ali's not the only employer. Loves ZipRecruiter. Like I say, I do too here. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. See for yourself how ZipRecruiter makes hiring faster and easier. Try it now for free. That's right, free. At ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority, MAJORITY, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. This episode is also brought to you by Magic Spoon. In fact, my whole day was brought to you by Magic Spoon. That is how I start my day, I don't know, 5 days a week, maybe more. And then usually when I wake up at 3 a.m, that's what I have. Y'all remember having breakfast cereal as a kid? Sugary, sweet, sort of like comfort food. Then you realize you get older, I can't put that junk into my body. Well, the beauty of Magic Spoon is there's a way to relive that magic, as it were, of your childhood cereal, but in a much, much healthier way. Magic Spoon is a new cereal company. They have discovered a way to recreate your favorite childhood cereals with 0 grams of sugar, 11 grams of protein, and only 3 net grams of carbs in each serving. Magic Spoon offers 4 flavors based on the all-time classics: cocoa, fruity, frosted, and blueberry. You can figure out what those, people my age certainly can. I don't know. I guess they had them all through those years. But they also have a variety pack. It lets you try all of them. For me, I'm a cocoa person. Saul, in my household, he's a fruity person. Mila, frosted. Works out quite well. And then we all occasionally dip into the blueberry, but it's really more cocoa and fruity are the big ones. Saul loves the cereal, and I feel like I'm not being a bad parent because he's not eating sugary junk. It's keto friendly, it's gluten free, it's grain free, it's soy free, low carb, and GMO free. Cocoa, like I say, is my favorite. And I even drink the milk at the end because it's all in there. Go to magicspoon.com/majority report, grab a variety pack today, try it, and be sure to use our promo code majority report at checkout to get free shipping. Let them know that we sent you. Magic Spoon's so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's magicspoon.com/majority report. Use the code majority report for free shipping. Thank Magic Spoon for our sponsoring and basically both for the podcast and for my breakfast for that point. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. Oh, we don't need to take a quick break, do we? Joining us right now is, do we have him? Okay, great. The Sterling Professor of American History, the Director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery Resistance and Abolition at Yale University, Professor David Blight, author, his most recent anyways, is Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here.
I have to tell you that I have told so many people about your course on the Civil War. It has honestly, I was just mentioning before you came on, I got about a half a dozen IMs as we announced that you were on the program today, because I've told so many people to listen to it. And I cannot recommend it enough. It has really changed my perspective on the history of this country. And so I can't tell you what an honor it is to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's start in first with Frederick Douglass, and then I want to move on to sort of like some of that aspects. Apparently, more and more people are talking about Frederick Douglass, and this, of course, is in reference to Donald Trump. I think maybe being aware of your book in some fashion, or at least maybe not, or the Pulitzer that was awarded to it, but. For those people who are not aware of Frederick Douglass being talked about, will you just give us sort of like the broad strokes of who he was? Because I think Frederick Douglass, I think Reconstruction, Civil War, is really undertaught in American history for some reason.
Yeah, well, it's never felt untaught to me because I've taught it all my life, but that's the bubble I live in. That comment from Trump didn't come from any knowledge of my book or, frankly, from any knowledge at all. But Douglass is a towering figure across the 19th century. He is, in many ways, the prose poet of American democracy. For those who don't know him yet, you will discover him primarily in his words. He wrote 1,200 pages of autobiography, 3 different autobiographies. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of short-form editorials, political editorials in his newspaper that he published for 16 years. And he wrote literally thousands of speeches. He may have been most famous in the public, at least, as an orator. And indeed, he was one of the greatest orators of the 19th century, of all of American history. But his story, of course, begins with the fact that he was born a slave. He grew up 20 years as a slave, born out on the eastern shore of Maryland. He was born in a backwater, really a kind of nowhere backwater of the American Slave Society. And we really probably wouldn't even know about him had he not been sent to Baltimore for portions of those 20 years as a slave. He was first sent there to be the companion of his owner's nephew. Then he was sent back in his teens. He spent 9 of his 20 years as a slave in Baltimore, a major ocean port, a major shipbuilding city, a city with a view on the ocean and the maritime world, and a city in which he lived as a slave, but he lived amidst a very large free black community. In fact, there were more free blacks in Baltimore than there were slaves, and that has a great deal to do with how he was able to cultivate language, cultivate his oratorical skills, cultivate his reading, cultivate his interest in the Bible and in local churches. And indeed have a degree, at least, of physical freedom of movement around the city in his teenage years, late teenage years. But he escapes at age 20, and within only 3 years in the North, he became an itinerant orator on the abolitionist circuit, and he took it by storm. So he then becomes this figure of words, of language, of the extraordinary ability to capture, first in his oratory, then later in his writing, in autobiographies, in his newspaper, and so on, this greatest American dilemma, this greatest problem in American history, the problem of slavery, race, the coming of, the turbulent 1850s, the coming of disunion and civil war, his role as an interpreter in the midst of this Civil War from his newspaper perch in Rochester, New York, is crucial. But then he's going to live all the way to 1895. He lives, in effect, across the whole 19th century almost. He lived to see all of its great events, interpret its great events, and play a role in most of those great events. He's one of those rare figures who is, well, for two reasons. First, he's born out there on the Eastern Shore in 1818. This is before steamboats, before the telegraph, before the railroad, before all those elements of modernity that would so change the United States and the world. But he's going to live all the way to 1895 when, for God's sake, you can cross the Atlantic in 8 days on a steamship. They have something called a phonograph that can record voices, although almost unbelievably, his voice was never recorded that we know of. He lived to a new age, electric light bulbs. They even had the first telephones. He lives to a new age of things modern, of modernity. But the other thing is, he is one of those rarest of activists or, radical reformers who actually lives to see his cause triumph. He lives to see his cause win in the abolition of slavery in the midst of the Civil War, and then the transformation of the United States under a new Constitution. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution made it a new Constitution and therefore a new republic. But he's also going to live long enough to see those triumphs all but betrayed and crushed in the post-Reconstruction South, which leads to terrorism and the Jim Crow system, which is being put in place by the time he died. So it's an epic life, and he left so much for us to conjure with as a thinker and as a writer and as a speaker. And we return to him over and over now, those who have discovered him. And we're trying to make more people do that. We return to him as a voice to help us understand, what is this thing called America? If America is an idea, what is it? What is it? If America is democracy, what does that mean? And how did it get transformed in all that slaughter of the Civil War? What was Reconstruction? What was it reconstructing? And why is race such an enduring, seemingly eternal problem in American society, whatever we say about ourselves and whatever we tell the world are our creeds? Why can we never completely solve this issue? There is so much to learn about those questions in Douglass's confrontations with these questions 160, 150, 140 years ago that can really help us today.
There's so much that there's moments where in his life where he says, and you talk about, you write about this, I should say, that are so reminiscent. Don't have the exact date when he says that black values lives are just not valued by white people. I mean, this is something obviously that we're hearing echoes, if not just exact echoes of still 130, 40 years later. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, which I found sort of fascinating, and I didn't have any sense of this, was the relationship within him between sort of like his, I don't know how to really express this, but his radicalism and his pragmatism. And in some ways I go to this because maybe I have a paucity of metaphors, but there's a quality of Lenny Bruce to his progression when he goes from being sort of and I didn't realize how sort of like renowned he was for his oratory skills, right? Like he's what I would say, like in Lenny Bruce's sort of like early stage, he's a comedian, he's a good comedian, but then at one point he starts getting much more radical and there's a lot more questions, and there's that dynamic that goes on with him. And it's sort of like when the pendulum swings within him throughout his life, from when he becomes, when he has that first, when he says that that he became a man from a slave. I don't have, my notes aren't, but he becomes a slave to a man by having a physical fight.
Yeah.
Yet he so much of what his skill set is from actually like performing and talking. Can you talk about that theme internal to him?
Sure. There are many contradictions and paradoxes about Douglass, which is, of course, one of the things that makes him so interesting. That actual passage from the original autobiography is, I have shown you how have shown you how a man was made a slave. Now I will show you how a slave becomes a man. Now that comes right after he has this epic fight, this struggle with an overseer named Edward Covey, to whom he has been rented out for 9 or 10 months. And Covey beat him savagely. And Covey was a real person, by the way. Douglass isn't making that up. He's not making up Covey anyway. And that's a classic kind of male resurrection story, in the sense of he resurrects himself from despair and this constant physical beating in bondage under Covey by fighting, by fighting back, but through his fists. Now, you don't find that story in women's slave narratives, because a woman taking on an overseer was a pretty hard thing to do, although there are some examples of it. But yeah, Douglass grew up having to fight with his fists. There's no question about that. He learned how to do that. He got the hell beat out of him in the shipyards of Baltimore more than once. In fact, he got smashed in the head with an anvil by a sailor. The white sailors sometimes resented him because they feared that, this black kid's going to take their jobs. Not a new thing. He'll encounter that again, even in the North. But to your question about the radicalism and the pragmatism, it's one of the most interesting things about Douglass, because he starts out as a true radical abolitionist. There's no question. He's a Garrisonian, meaning he's a follower of William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison discovered him Garrison and his people, and they brought him out on the lecture circuit. They helped even support his family to a degree, especially when he went off to England for 18 months. And he was in all major ways a moral suasionist, meaning under Garrison, the strategy was to change the hearts and minds of your audiences, to appeal to their hearts and minds. And you did it with a very radical, often Old Testament biblical message, that they either come to the altar and reform, or they are about to be destroyed. Now, he learns with time, not too long either, before he's even out of his 20s, that kind of approach is perhaps not going to ultimately win the day. And he becomes much more interested in politics. And in the wake of the Mexican War, and especially the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which endangers every black person in the North now, he begins to sidle up to some degree, at least rhetorically, to the possible uses of violence. He breaks away from Garrison and begins to embrace what was known as the anti-slavery interpretation of the Constitution, trying to find a way to get the law on the side of abolition, instead of always saying the Constitution is just hopelessly complicitous with slavery. But mostly what Douglass was learning is that slavery was a gigantic moral problem, but it was also a gigantic political problem, meaning you had to find a way to fight it in the halls of power. That means automatically you're going to have to find a way to make deals with political parties, with people who at least have sympathy, toward anti-slavery. The course of the 1850s, the decade that leads up to the American Civil War, is when Douglass transforms, to a degree, from a radical abolitionist into a still radical, but a pragmatic abolitionist, looking for every way possible, first to damage this institution of slavery and then to destroy it. And it gets him to the point where he is at least open to supporting something like the original Republican Party and Abraham Lincoln, although that's a difficult dance for him at first. but it's the prototype in American history, especially for a black leader, who's always on the outside knocking on the door. You know, there's always the radical outsider, but is now trying to find a foothold inside of institutions, inside of a political party, and maybe even inside the government, when you can find sympathy and interest and, you know, common will with white politicians. This was never an easy thing. And the Civil War is going to solve some of these things for him, but of course, in massive bloodshed.
What struck me too about that transition, particularly that period when he returns from the British Isles after 16, 17 months, and this is in 47, I think it was, where he it's almost like his anger is ramped up on some level because you, as you're right, like he's returning to, he's sort of tasted what a society where he is not, you know, a part of a slave class, or, you know, or at least, you know, and he returns back to America, and it makes him more angry, which, you know, I can, you know, that makes total sense. But his reaction is to become more pragmatic. Like he harnesses that rage in a way that is very productive, I guess, in some way.
It takes time, but yeah, this is where the mastery of language and the power of words are so important, because there's a lot of rage in this young Frederick Douglass in his 20s and now moving into his 30s, tremendous rage in him. But he had the great good fortune to become so adept at both speaking and writing. He had that ability to process this rage. And now he creates his own newspaper, and he has to put that baby out week after week after week. As he says, I had to have something to say every week. And he did. But you're pointing to the British Isles, the first trip there of 18 months in 45 to 47. It's one of the 2 or 3 most important pivotal turning points in Douglass's life. He goes there a young 27-year-old Garrisonian moral suasionist, never been on a steamboat before, steamship. But he is embraced first in Ireland for a month, then in Scotland, even more so, because he arrived in Scotland during one of their great ecclesiastical wars over whether to send money back to the American South that had been raised to support the new Church of Scotland. And then in Britain for the following year, he makes all kinds of close friendships, relationships, lifetime relationships in some cases with the British, Irish, Scottish anti-slavery movement. And he is treated like a very special, some of them treated him like this exotic brown black man from the United States, a former slave, like an exhibit they could go see. But on the other hand, some of them embraced him as dear friends. And he'd never experienced that before. And he encountered some, but only a small degree of overt racism around the British Isles. He certainly saw some of it. But when he arrived back in the U.S., he's an angry young black man, because he's coming back into the hothouse of American racism. And the first speech, when he goes out on the stump, right after he gets back in 47, he is saying things like, and this is all in the book, he's saying things like, I have no country. I have no patriotism. My country hates me. I hate it back. At one point he says, I only look forward to seeing its constitution shattered into pieces. One of the radical abolitionists, Wendell Phillips, took him aside at one point and said, Fred, tone it down, man. You're going to lose the audience here. But he wasn't toning anything down. But what he was beginning to learn is how to harness, as you say, harness that power of anger and rage into arguments. Now, Douglass's life, though, is an interesting test, as it has been for so many other writers in history. How much can language change the world? How much can a writer, speaker, however brilliant, change the world? How much does that writer, speaker have to find ways also to harness events and harness political institutions, to harness the society somehow into this use of language to change the world. Our greatest writers have always had to ask this. They want to change. Every major writer wants to change something about their society or their world, but how much can they? Douglass is a fascinating story of examining that process, because he did have an enormous impact. I speculate in the book that number one, he may have been seen as an orator in particular, or heard, therefore, by more Americans than anyone else who ever lived in the 19th century, because his speaking tours were just ubiquitous all the time, year after year after year, right into old age, right up until the last year of his life. And also, I speculate in the book that he may have traveled more miles than any other American in this pursuit, except probably Mark Twain. And Twain went to Asia, so that's kind of, cheating.
But room, I guess.
But he had this problem eventually of visibility and fame, which can be pleasurable but also perilous.
We should also say that era, when he comes back, is when he gave his speech about the 4th of July, which has I think resonated particularly in this era. But do you think
that speech, by the way, had its greatest month ever this summer? It was just being used everywhere. And
yes.
I was being interviewed 3 times a day about that speech during the week of 4th of July. There'd never been a week like that about Douglass, which is amazing.
I mean, that's, I think, in some ways, activists today, writers today, speakers today, doing that very thing, using the events of the moment to leverage. But do you think that dynamic, and this is more, I guess, a sort of like a parallel to, do you think that dynamic of writers, I mean, the ability for him to be so dominant, and which is sort of shocking, and some was also a function of the time? I mean, there are less people writing, and he is a really unique voice in that era of someone who was that well educated and that talented in oratory and writing, but also had been born a slave. Is there?
Yeah.
Can that be replicated today, or what does it look like if it's?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. The replication of that today would be, the kid from nowhere. And this happens in America. It's rare, but the kid from nowhere with almost no education, who nevertheless today it wouldn't be the kid without a single day in a school in his life. That just wouldn't happen today. Credentialing is just too important today. But it would be the kid from almost nowhere who manages to get to get a decent education somehow. A teacher finds him, moves him on to this and to that. He gets into a college. He gets hooked on to, I don't know, this professor and that professor, and then maybe into a law school or something, or not. But who has an enormous talent, an artistic talent, a political talent, a linguistic talent. It still happens. I mean, there are these stories that still happen in America, Barack Obama was not necessarily that person, given the kind of education he had, although, he does come from obscurity and manages to be bright enough to get sent first to a college in LA and then to Columbia, and on and on and on. The rest is history. But he was a prodigy. Douglass was a prodigy. And there are aspects of his abilities and talents that are explainable. His abilities with language, I do deal with in the book. I mean, it comes very early. He has certain lucky breaks while he's a slave that introduces him to language and to the Bible and biblical storytelling and so on and so on. And I'm convinced he was when he was both a child and then a teenager, like kids today, any kid, he found the one thing he was really good at, which was standing up and speaking, or he could read, and all of his fellow his buddies, he called them his band of brothers, male slaves, some of whom were younger, most of whom were older than him. They couldn't read or write. He had a special talent. And he found the one thing he was good at, and he just was going to get better and better at it. Just like today, a kid who can, dribble between his legs and behind his back is got to start, or a kid that can do science projects and is a prodigy. This is what Douglass was, but he never set foot a day in his life in a real classroom. Now, nor did Abraham Lincoln, except for like a couple of years. So this, in the 19th century, this was all much more possible or likely than it ever would be today. But you got to also know here that this was the golden age of oratory. It was great orators were the only game in town in the 19th century.
Right.
The Chautauqua circuit, the lecture series. Ralph Waldo Emerson made his fame as much from his traveling lecture series as he did from writing his great essays. I mean, Emerson reached more auditors than he did readers. It's hard to imagine that about a writer like Emerson, whom we know now as the great essayist on the page, but he traveled all the time giving these lectures. So the person who could hold an audience for an hour or two out in a small town in Ohio or a village in Pennsylvania or, upstate New York, was a hit and was needed. Now, and it was the slavery question above all else, and the abolition movement above all else, that spread information, spread reform movements more than anything. And the abolitionists made great use of the new modern technologies, and Douglass became very adept at all of them. First is transportation, the railroads. Second is the rotary press that made possible now weekly and daily newspapers. And then, of course, simply the voice. And in the book, I have many accounts, particularly from newspapers, of people describing Douglass as a speaker. It became a kind of, especially in the aftermath of the Civil War, it became a kind of wonder of the American world if you could see Douglass. Frederick Douglass is coming to town. Even if you didn't always agree with him, it was a thing.
Well, that's the part that sort of fascinates me, because you mentioned, these other speakers in that golden era. You mentioned Barack Obama, who has sort of his story where he came out, but Douglass is a guy who is challenging sort of the fundamental building blocks of the country.
Yeah.
And so
he wants to tear it down.
Right. I mean, does he achieve this level of celebrity and fame despite that, or is the movement that's associated with that part of propelling him up?
It's both. I mean, the early abolitionists, and when he joins the movement in the early 1840s and right through the 40s into the 50s, abolitionists were extremely unpopular. Now, they had a following, of course, and there were sections of the North in which they were always safe and they had a following. There were towns that were known to be abolitionists and towns that were not, but they were notorious. I mean, we don't have any firm statistics, but probably no more than 15% of the northern population, this is in the Free States by 1850 or so, was ever associated with any anti-slavery society. It meant the vast majority had nothing to do with abolitionism, in fact, hated it. But one of the techniques, directly to your question, one of the techniques he learned from the Garristonian abolitionists who kind of brought him out on the circuit was to rile up an audience. The whole point of this was to stimulate your audience, to get your audience angry. Even if they threw a few tomatoes at you, that was success because you got their attention. The whole idea was to chastise as you instruct. It's a very Christian kind of message. It's an Old Testament, Jeremiatic kind of technique. It's a preacher's technique. I'm going to call you to the altar now. I'm going to make you hurt. I'm going to make you look at your hypocrisy, which is what the great 4th of July speech does, among other things. And I'm going to get you angry. I'm going to trouble you. You're not going to like what you're going to hear here, but you might listen. That's what prophets do, by the way. Prophets are not, well, first of all, there aren't very many of them. And prophets are not usually just nice people you want to have lunch with.
Right.
They trouble you.
Let's turn a little bit to Reconstruction. I mean, my understanding of Reconstruction came so much from your work and from Eric Foner's, but the idea of it being the second American Revolution, as you call it, and in many respects, I liken it to like Yavna for Judaism, like the rabbinic Judaism that we practice today, that everybody perceives as Judaism, is actually sort of like version 2.
Right.
And in many respects, the founding fathers that we have today were the ones who basically constructed, the 14th Amendment and 13th and 15th, but the 14th. And what is the importance of understanding, of coming to that understanding?
Well, first of all, I love the Jewish or Hebrew prophetic analogy here, because it is the one Douglass used so much. The temple was destroyed. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, as the prophet said, because it had to be. The people had become so corrupt, so hopelessly poisoned by their own venality and hubris and all the rest. The temple was going to be destroyed, and they were going to go into exile, and they may or may not find their way back. That's the great story of Exodus, right? Well, Douglass will interpret the Civil War in many ways through that lens, not exclusively, but and so did so many other Americans, for that matter. The Civil War and Reconstruction is the destruction of the first American Republic. And you don't need Frederick Douglass to tell you that. I mean, he does tell you that 1,000 times over. But Lincoln argued the same thing. What's the argument of the Gettysburg Address? Well, that short, most well-known American speech, if people just look at it, there's Lincoln standing in that cemetery and saying, the 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, but he's saying that nation is being destroyed right here. We're burying the results of that destruction, and we have to imagine a new one. Now, he didn't have that all figured out yet, but he did actually use the word equality in that speech. He drew that off the Declaration of Independence. Now, Douglass and many others saw the Civil War as this reckoning that destroyed that first slaveholding republic of 80-some years. It did it in horrible bloodshed, but they found a way to argue that that was necessary bloodshed. That's an easy thing to say, not an easy thing to reap and to do. But out of it came this responsibility, at least among the leadership of that Republican Party that had been founded back in the 1850s, to resist the future of slavery. And they did. And they took the leadership anyway, took responsibility for the freedom of these 4 million slaves and for answering the question, now, who are they? What are they? The 13th Amendment says, before the war ever ends, slavery shall never exist. Any kind of involuntary servitude can never exist. The 14th Amendment, the most important of all, especially with Section 1, is the Equal Protection Clause. It's the Equality Before Law Clause. It's the Birthright Citizenship Clause. It's the Equality Clause of our Constitution. And the 15th, of course, is the Voting Rights Amendment, 1869, 1870, which didn't go as far as the radicals like Douglass would have wanted, because it didn't prevent qualifications tests of all kinds. But there it was now, the right to vote, at least for Black men. This was a new constitution. This was defining the American Republic now in a wholly new way, a new inclusive way. It's saying it's being founded now on some degree of equality between the races, the ethnicities, the religions. And Douglass was right at the heart of this. This was Douglass's whole argument about what this Armageddon had been all about. And for about 4 to 5 to 6 years, depending on where you're standing, they reinvented the United States. But every great and it's a revolution, let's face it. There are different kinds of revolutions, aren't there? But every revolution always foments a counter-revolution. I mean, if it's important enough, there will be a reaction. And we've seen this again and again and again. Well, what is Trumpism? But in some ways, a counter-revolution against the Obama presidency and against liberalism and against so many of the great changes of the 1960s. Even the so-called Reagan Revolution, which now gets viewed in sepia tones. The Reagan Revolution was a revolution against the 60s. It was against civil rights. It was against feminism. It was against all the rights movements. Anyway, the first great counter-revolution in American history was the White South's ability to revive under the reformed Democratic Party and through the uses of terror and violence, the worst levels of it we've ever seen in our history. The ability of the White South to revive in the 1870s, to take back control of their state governments, what they called Southern redemption, and then ultimately to defeat the Reconstruction governments and the Reconstruction laws and measures, and especially to defeat Black suffrage, Black voting, brought about essentially, an end to Reconstruction around 1877 and into the 1880s. And it made possible, it didn't happen overnight by any means, but it made possible the evolution then of a system of first de facto and then de jure segregation of the races, eventually into this elaborate system of Jim Crow laws, and an American system, in effect, of racial apartheid. So
and that counter-revolution lasted, well, I mean, it lasted in that form for decades.
70 years or so. It's it depends on when you date its beginning. I mean, the real Jim Crow system, at least in law, begins in the 1890s. I mean, the 1890s, the first overt disfranchisement law passed by Mississippi. But by 1900, and especially by 1910, all of the ex-Confederate states have become completely Jim Crow societies, and so have other sections of the country, by the way, including in the North. And a part of this process all along has been extremely overt uses of discrimination and extremely overt uses of the denial of the right to vote, of voter fraud, and extremely brutal uses of terrorist violence.
The other day we had Susan Mettler on who was talking about Wilmington, which I had never was not aware, which was horrific. And we
1898, yeah. I just reviewed a new book on that by David Zucchino. It's coming out in the New York Review of Books. It's incredible. It's a story Americans need to know better, because it really was a white supremacist coup d'etat that took over the state of North Carolina, where an interracial coalition had held on quite well, thank you, in the 1890s. And Black politicians were getting elected, especially in eastern North Carolina around Wilmington, for years. In fact, the only remaining Black congressman in the United States at that point was from Wilmington, North Carolina. But the white supremacists of North Carolina got organized in 1898 and ran and they were so overt compared to today's vote suppressors and white supremacists. Would that our vote suppressors today were as honest as they were back then. Although they're getting more and more on it. They're beginning to say out loud the things they think.
I mean, one of the things that I think you've argued in your books is this notion of the Civil War, the shooting war ended, but in many respects, the fundamentals of what were driving that war has not. And, I think back to just that notion of an ongoing counter-revolution and an ongoing revolution. And those moments where the revolution wins out seem very, very narrow in terms of time. Right. And then there's these long stretches, because I'm quite convinced that you could draw a line from the Voting Rights Act in 65 to the Supreme Court in 2013.
Oh yeah,
gutting Section 5.
Right.
And that is an uninterrupted sort of slow moving process. And we are still in that sort of that process now. And it's, when we talk about, just this past week, the implications of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments, when you look at what's going on in Florida, the disenfranchisement of felons, and then with the use of a poll tax, that is a mirror. That is like almost like a tracing of what was going on 150 years ago in the sort of post-Reconstruction era.
Well, that's very well put, Sam. And I've said this in many places in print that, we live with the legacies of Reconstruction around us every day. If for one thing, my lawyer friends tell me that close to 2/3 of all litigation in American courts at one point or another come around to 14th Amendment litigation. We are forever debating what equality before the law actually means in courts. Let's not forget Bush v. Gore, 5-4, when the Supreme Court chose our president, argued it on the basis of equal protection under the 14th Amendment for the state of Florida. And on we could go. Gay marriage, on the other hand, from a different perspective, was a 14th Amendment decision. It was equality before the law. And John Roberts said, yeah, I guess they're right. So it's all around us. And then you take the issue of federalism. My goodness, we don't talk about that enough. We have a states' rights Supreme Court right now, and it's about to get even more so, perhaps. Clarence Thomas is the most states' rights Supreme Court justice since one of those Southerners in the late 19th century, which is so weird, but it's true. What is the proper relationship of federal power to state power? It's an eternal question in America. Now, the Civil War had a gigantic row over that, right? And we had, people had a right, some people, Northerners who had won that war, had a right in, say, 1870 to think that, states' rights had been really pretty well crushed here in the blood of Antietam or Gettysburg. But no, not at all. The Supreme Court, even with all of the members appointed by Republican presidents, by 1883 is going to basically wipe out the 14th Amendment in the famous civil rights cases of 1883 and say that, no, this discrimination issue, whether it's a hotel or a train or wherever, it can only be settled at the state level. Which basically said, the 14th Amendment doesn't mean anything. Anyway, again and again.
You mentioned Reagan. That's how Reagan launched his general campaign after the Republican convention, was at the Neshoba County Fair talking about states' rights.
Exactly. And he went after unions. Remember, he crushed the air traffic control unions and then other unions. And, the anti-union movement in this country, the so-called right to work laws are the uses. Let's face it, the right wing in America has been very effective at using the language of the 14th Amendment, the language of equality, to fight against those very achievements in equality for women and Black and brown and immigrant people and so on. They're very adept at that, to say the least.
Can I ask you one final question that's a little bit sort of like tangential, but the post office, obviously playing a very big role in all these questions about, voting right now. The post office, this is another example of, and I think, your work has sort of taught me more about the concept of history in many respects.
That's the point of doing history, to just help us understand why it's so important.
Well, honestly, like that,
why it's all around us.
I lament that it took me this long to sort of understand that, but I guess it's
doing very well at it. You're doing very well at it.
But the post office is also another issue that, like, there was so much fighting in it was the radical Republicans who, sort of like gave birth to this notion of the post office and its ubiquityness, I guess.
Yeah.
And we're still, it's still a contention on some level.
It's given me a renewed joy when I walk into a post office. Sometimes it's it's boring. It's something you have to do. You got to get some stamps. You got to mail something. But by God, it's a democratic institution. It's one place almost all of us use. Now, not as much anymore because of FedEx and the internet and Amazon. But even Amazon uses it. The postal service guys deliver Amazon packages all day, every day. So, yeah, and an attack on that is just yet another way. Let's be honest about this. Higher voter turnout serves one of America's political parties. Lower voter turnout serves another of America's political parties. And the one wanting lower voter turnout is doing everything it can possibly do to suppress the turnout of Americans to vote. They are doing it because they've seen the demographics, and the demographics have scared the hell out of them. 1/3 of all the votes cast this election will be cast by African Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans. And those numbers are growing like crazy every year. The voter turnout among young people in 2018 was unprecedented. Republicans, given the fact that they have become essentially the white people's party, are in trouble. They're fighting against, they're colliding with modernity again. And they're against most of the great changes of modernity. They can't even bring themselves to believe in climate change, until they get burned in a forest, I guess. So we're living in the post office. It became this visible example. Do you remember when the delivery service had a strike? UPS, sorry. Those guys won their strike that year. Because people love UPS, it turns out. They love having things delivered by UPS. And people got behind them because they were a service that people tended to rely on and even love. The UPS guy in his brown shorts walks up, he's your friend. So, there's a sense in which the right in America is fighting against modernity itself. Now, they win sometimes because they can manage the rules, and sometimes they win because of ideology in some cases. But they're up against a demographic phenomenon that is not on their side. So I have a new piece coming out it's in Die Zeit, the German weekly. They asked me to write a fairly long historical piece on voter suppression, the history of voter suppression. And that's coming out, I think, next week. It's just amazing, the measures, the methods that Republicans have turned to. And by the way, the template for that is Reconstruction too. I mean, there are all kinds of things that were methods that were used to keep Black people from voting. Actually, in Reconstruction, though, they ultimately just used guns.
Well, David Blight, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your coming on. We will put a link to Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, on majority.fm, and also a link to your audio course that on the Civil War, which covers Reconstruction and, of course, the sort of the post-Reconstruction era. It's been such an important work in my understanding of so many things. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks so much, Sam. Thanks for having me. I should update that lecture series sometime because the jokes are getting old, I think.
Well, they still work. They still fly. But I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a little break here and head to the fun half of the program. This marks the end of the first half of the program. Just a reminder, Your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support the free show and you get extra content in the fun half, which is actually technically is even more than half. It's really like a fun, like 125% or 150% of the show. I don't know how to articulate that in the fun 1.5 half. I don't know. But yeah, I know it's strange. Nomi's looking at me. What are you talking about? But it's true. It is true. Don't forget also amquickie.com. You can get 7-minute worth of headlines every morning on your podcast. It's out by 8 a.m. usually, and check that out. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Get the MR blend, and we have the Carpenter pencils and the I'm Losing a Bro t-shirts. Wait, is it I'm losing what? Oh no, the Pause It t-shirts are in the merch shop at shop.majorityreport.com. Brendan just put a thumbs up on the pause. I like that.
You just found that.
Nomi, what's happening on your show today at 3? Oh, I should also remind you, I will send out a tweet and maybe on the app a little indication. I'm probably going to be streaming the debate on Twitch tonight. Not 100% sure, but I will let you know. Nomi, what's happening on your show at 3 p.m. today?
At 3 p.m. today Eastern, we have Wendell Potter on to talk about the ACA and what is at risk with the Supreme Court nominee likely moving forward. And the Democrats just like, yeah, I can't do anything, can't post, we know the jam. And then we have a panel with Napoleon DeLegend and Josh Potish, who everyone knows from Twitter, but he worked on my campaign. So I love to see folks kind of grow into their own activism. And he is, he's been covering the protests, and he, on Twitter, just remarkably well. He sort of owned this space of collecting footage and amplifying it, and he's blown up, and it's been great content. So
I'm sure we've played some of his stuff, actually.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
He's great. He's a rising star.
Fantastic.
That's at the Nomiki Show, YouTube / the Nomiki Show. I have to actually give, I'm really bad at promoting. Clearly. So YouTube / the Nomiki Show.
And folks can check the podcast description for a link to your show too.
Oh, thank you.
We always keep
Very
it
nice.
there and people can find it. They don't have to rely on my pronunciation of your first name.
I wrote it. Did you see what I did?
Oh my
I can't believe it's taken me this long to do that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Also, don't forget, check out the Antifada at patreon.com/the Antifada. Jamie's got new content up there, multitudes of new content. Matt, what's happening on TMBS tonight?
Tonight on TMBS, we're going to do a members-only pregame show where Gene Bajlan will stop by. He's going to talk to us about a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We'll also do...
I read about that. That's blowing up now.
Yeah, so he's going to give us the down low on that. And then we're also going to be covering the debates later in the evening. So, and the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel, check that out.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program. See you in, oh, geez, I just saw this. New York City's positive rate is over 3% for the first time in months. Not good, folks. Not good.
Sam, we also have a new video animation for the Danarchy.
We do?
One half song. Yeah, by one board editor. This was sent to us by Danarchy.
So
Matt and I watched it yesterday.
Approved and but by one board editor. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Let's check this out.
Premiere.
In for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Danarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them. Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what? Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy! I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Wow. That is so awesome. Oh my God. I was
brilliant.
Really tearing up a little bit during that. God.
That was incredible. You're like, you'll never get bored of that. There's just so many little pieces.
That is so awesome.
Wow.
Wow.
Brilliant.
I wish Michael could have seen that. That is so awesome. I can't even get over it. Wow. That is thank you, one board editor. Obviously, thank you, Danarchy, but also that is wow. I can't get over
Beautiful.
it. This stuff. I mean, that is the only argument that one might have to have Trump serve another president. Keep that thing relevant for at least another, because I think we will keep that going until we will play that. I pledge to you now, we will have that in rotation until I retire. And I don't know when that's going to be, but, like 10 years from now, or somebody's going what is that?
Who's that guy with the goatee?
Who's who are those people?
Oh, my God. Is that what they call Nazis?
Oh, is that what Barack Obama looked like? Wow, that is fantastic.
So good.
Thank you so much. I can't get over it. Wow, that's nuts. That was really great. Boy.
Piece of art.
I can't. It really is. So, Nomi, I'm going to be talking to Elie Mystal tomorrow on the program more about ACB and the things that that Democrats can do to, at the very least, slow the roll. Right? I mean, Chuck Schumer came out and said, "I'm not going to meet with her." That to me seems. I mean, on one level, I appreciate it. It says that is that this is wrong. It's hypocritical. On the other hand, like just even taking from the interview we just did in terms of Frederick Douglass, the idea of like, this measure of pragmatism and use of rhetoric, and like, to my mind, I don't know if there's a way to stop this nomination. There probably isn't. There is a way to, I think, to slow it and gum it up, and maybe you never know, you get lucky. There's a hurricane in Washington D.C. and things are shut down for a week, and that pushes stuff and whatever, right? I mean, because you've slowed everything else down. And we can talk about the specifics of that, but in terms of like messaging, in terms of the election, right? If you cannot win this battle, you can lose it in a way that accrues benefit to you politically. It seems to me the way you do this is through her commitment to ending the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. And because this was such an effective tool in 2018, it remains I think, an effective tool. So much so that you see people like Cory Gardner going out there saying, like, we've got to protect pre-existing conditions. Dude, you voted against it.
Really?
No, honestly, but
he's in trouble. But that's actually a really good point, because the risk that they're taking, while Republicans, the real risk they're taking is actually losing the Senate. They may have some sort of net gain in that these senators will have the platform, the national platform, but they got to be in their districts campaigning right now. Some of these races are extremely tight, and it's not worth the risk, I think, in some of these situations. So I think it works to McConnell's benefit in some ways to slow it down, too. The reality is they probably will get her through. So why don't you just call it a deal and slow it down?
It's unclear to me that McConnell really cares at the end of the day about, or that he may calculate, like, look, it's worth it to lose the Senate for me to get 3 Supreme Court justices on there, because I am locking in a generations of conservative rule on the court. And I have locked in my legacy, which is I have presided over the greatest number of federal lifetime appointments to the judiciary in the history of the country in the shortest period of time, and within one term, and which I think is the case. And I think that's where he's going. And so to me, it seems like, and then we'll talk about the debate. To me, it seems like if I'm Chuck Schumer and I'm thinking what's going to help us at the very least take the Senate, it's going to be walking out of a room with Amy Coney Bennett, regardless of what the conversation was, and saying, wow, I feel very afraid for the Affordable Care Act and for health insurance if she's on there. And never mind, the Affordable Care Act as it stands, any type of reform to health care, she seems committed to stopping. And, just like, I don't know, did they talk about it? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But if I'm Chuck Schumer, that's what I'm going to walk out of the room saying at that point, is like, they're going to destroy healthcare and she's going to help them. And that's,
there's nothing to stop him. He can do that now. There's nothing that should stop them from doing that now. Right. But also, but going back to the point, I think that there is a benefit in McConnell. He wins the nominee, and he keeps the Senate, maybe. I think it's a long shot at this point. But in postponing until after the election, before inauguration.
I would think so. But I think he's got to be thinking, okay, if Biden wins in a landslide, maybe, what was it, in 2012, there was the Republican autopsy, I think it was. Yeah. And there was 2 months where the Republicans were like, we really need to look into ours. Like Sean Hannity, I remember going up on TV, said, listen, we may have to do immigration reform, because people really don't like us and blah, blah, blah. And that lasted 2 months. And it's conceivable to me that McConnell's thinking, if Biden wins in a blowout, I've got the lame duck, but weird things could happen. Like, I think if I'm Mitch McConnell, and I agree with you, to have an open seat, that's what helped Trump in 2016, big time. 1/4 of the Trump voters said, I did it for that seat. I voted for him. But if I'm McConnell and I have the opportunity to ram this through before the election, I'm going to do it. I'm all in with my chips. I'm like, I'm pushing it all to the middle because I'm going to walk away from the table a winner, even if we lose the Senate. This isn't going to make the difference. Let's put it that way. We either are going to lose it or we're not going to lose it. I'm going to get this done because this is the stuff that, evil legacies are built upon.
Even if like Lindsey Graham loses, I mean, the stakes are high here. These are real. The leaders of the Republican Party are at risk of losing their seats. I just don't see that happening. I think he'll be eating too much crap when he could just wait and get both things.
Well, we'll see about that. And so let's talk about the debate tonight. If you are Joe Biden, let's just assume that Joe Biden can execute any of your plans. What would you have him do?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, assume that he had the will and the interest. Of course, Medicare for All would be the first thing on the list. And I think it's the first rebuttal.
Right.
For the debate. You mean the debate strategy.
For the debate.
Got it. First off, I feel like, and I'm going to talk about this on my show today in the opening, this debate is like, it's like this election cycle. If it were an election day, say 6 weeks before the election, this would be like having a debate at noon on election day. And then like having the remainder of the debates at like 7 p.m. on election day. I don't know if it's actually going to sway because so many people are voting early. I mean, Arizona, for instance, 80% vote. This is before COVID. 80% vote before election day. So, there was a poll that came out today saying that like 3% might be swayed. Now, put that in perspective, the key states, we have to do the electoral math. I think it's great for TV. I think it's great for fundraising. I think it's great for turning around ads rapidly, but I don't know if it's going to be able. I mean, maybe you take those ads and you put them in whatever they think the swing states are, Sunbelt states. I mean, who knows at this point? And maybe it sways, 10,000 voters. Those 10,000 voters could determine the election, as they did in 2016. I think what's most important for Biden's strategy is to keep people excited. And that is the issue right now is he's not being portrayed as a fighter. He's being portrayed as Sleepy Joe. There's no campaign. There are a few surrogates going out there. He needs to reinforce that what's at stake in this election is somebody staying home or being swayed by Trump's voter suppression strategies across the board to stay home. And I mean, as your guest prior talked about. So I think the most important thing for him to do is just stay on track and seem like the sane one and make a call to all voters to step up.
So, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking, I'm asking is rhetorically, like, what is it? What are the themes? Like, they're going into the debate and his advisors are saying, these are the three things that you need to keep returning to. I mean, this is what I hope they're saying. Yeah. These are the three things you need to return to, as opposed to, and I think that's going to be it. And I think like one is, the first one, it seems to me, is Trump has completely failed when it comes to the coronavirus. And, just from today's news in and of itself, right? We've topped, 45,000 infections a day. U.S. deaths are at 205,000 cases. We're at almost 7 million, I guess 180,000, probably 200,000 maybe by the time the debate happens, frankly. We have the story out today that the CDC, or I should say the director of the CDC, Robert Redfield, apparently was caught. I don't know if caught is really the right word. He was on a commercial airline talking, and it sounds like someone from NBC News was sitting next to him or behind him and essentially took notes, if not recorded the conversation. And I mean, you hear about this all the time, like on the Acela, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
And that the guy was talking about that guy Atlas, who's the new top advisor to Donald Trump on the coronavirus. And he was saying, quote, everything he says is false. This is Robert Redfield. This guy would not be our pick for the head of the CDC. He was a guy who basically, during the AIDS crisis, as far as I can tell, was like, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
He was a little bit more like, gay people shouldn't really, maybe if we didn't have gay people, we wouldn't have AIDS type of situation. And apparently he is talking about Atlas being a freak show. He hasn't denied the conversation. The only report from the CDC was like, oh, the reporter only heard one side of the conversation. Well, that's all that they're reporting.
Okay.
Fauci is saying that the U.S. is not in a good place. We are 8-9 months into this. It is growing like wildfire in the Dakotas because of Nome, who, welcomed Donald Trump for rallies, wouldn't wear a mask, is out there. You want that huge biker convention, do it. And now it's like, now her numbers are off the charts, I guess, out there. And if I'm Joe Biden, I'm talking about coronavirus.
Right.
And maybe as like, what they call that Gish Gallop. I just say like, here's a guy who pays, $750 a year in taxes and can't even deal with coronavirus. So that Trump doesn't know which one of those things to go after. I would just combine everything on there. Like, oh, fancy hair over here isn't doing any of his work on coronavirus. I mean, I don't know. We can't know if the debate is going to make any difference. But it's like there's only so many days and so many opportunities to make a difference. We don't know which one that is. He's got to go out there and pretend like it does, because maybe it will. Maybe it will knock off 1,000.
He can't mess up. He can't mess up. I am not in the camp that Biden is winning. I mean, stop reporting on national polls. It's not relevant. I mean, I think there's a question about how well he's doing in the Rust Belt, a very serious question. You could see it where money's being invested. You could see it how these coordinated campaigns are working. A lot of funds are being pulled from key Rust Belt states. I think they're doubling down in states like Arizona. I think they're doubling down, in Pennsylvania again. And I think it's extremely close. And I think if Biden doesn't win the whole Rust Belt, meaning all the states in the Rust Belt except for Illinois, then he's got a problem. Then he needs to make sure that Pennsylvania is delivered, New Hampshire is delivered, Arizona is delivered, Colorado is delivered. And that's very doable too. But I don't think what the media is portraying this being some sort of landslide, unless there is just such extraordinary turnout the way that we've seen in the last 2 months with some of these elections. Of course, then there's all these other factors that play a part of that. So I don't think he has a lot of room to make errors. I think that but when he does kind of have to, I mean, remember the debate with Bernie. Everybody thought he was going to flub, and anybody who's watched any debates of Biden's in the past, 20 years, even if he's saying things that are, plagiarized, he's still a very good debater. He's still a very good debater.
And I am of the mind that his strategy is never going to be to energize the base. I think they're saying like, it's okay if you're unenthusiastic about voting for me, as long as you're enthusiastic about voting against him. And I think that is their strategy. And I think he's just got to go up there. He's just got to be relatively competent and just keep saying coronavirus, haircuts, and no taxes, and healthcare. I think to a certain extent. My understanding is that just like in 2018, you've got a lot of the candidates on the running for Congress talking about healthcare again. And it makes sense. I mean, we never get any action on it, though I guess we did with the Affordable Care Act. But
I think the one thing I would caution is I don't think that the same old vote against Trump is going to work. I don't think it's moving enough voters the way that he needs to. And when I say, excitement, I think he needs to make the 2020 going into October case against Donald Trump, the final case against Donald Trump, a reminder of what the last 4 years has brought us and what's at stake in the next 4 years, reminder of what the last 2 months have brought us,
right?
And remind what could happen in the next 2 months before, the inauguration, while he's still in office, if he's, voted out. These are the kinds of things that I think are just going to excite people in a way that, yes, you're voting against Trump, but you're also voting for down ballot candidates. You're voting for to keep whatever preservation of democracy we have alive. But they have to make the case. It's just, and one more thing, just on that note, I think it'd be really smart if he mentioned some things like some of these key states and what's at stake on their ballots. I mean, he could bring that into the loop. Like, Trumpism has spread across the country, and, in states where coronavirus is bad, let's look at the leadership there, and be fantastic if those senators were up or those leaders were up for a challenge.
I think he's going to aim the tax stuff at your Michigans, your Wisconsins, your Pennsylvanias. And then I think he's going to drop in, you're out there with the rest of the Republicans saying that old people should die. And that that coronavirus doesn't mean anything to anybody.
Yeah.
Because he's doing well with seniors in Florida. And I think he's got to capitalize on that. And that is why I think he's doing well with seniors in Florida.
Biden, you mean?
Biden is, yeah. Because I think at one point people start to go hey, wait a second. I didn't sign up for the whole I need to sacrifice things so that people can go have, go to a bar and party without masks on. That's not, I didn't know. I don't want that. That doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a lot of seniors who are going hey, wait a second. They're out there basically saying, I got to take one for the team. And the team they're trying to win the go out to the bar and do a funnel, trophy or whatever. I don't think I want that. Go to a 308 area code. I just say that because I saw I haven't even called into the phone.
A great ad.
Honestly, hold on. Am I still there? But I just lost, give me a second. I don't know what happened here. I got to call into the system. So if you're on the phone, just hang in there. But I think that is, I saw a video of after DeSantis said that you go to bars, people going into a bar and just partying around. It's like they've just been, I don't know. Seems a little. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 308? What? 308. Who's this?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Kowalski.
I am so sorry. I was working on a rake.
Working on a rake. Classic story, of course.
Indeed. So I have a few debate predictions for the night.
Okay.
All right. I believe when they walk out onto that stage, Biden is going to assert his dominance by shaking Trump's hand and immediately snipping off Trump's toupee. That would be the greatest opener.
That would be something. That would be something. That would be a great YouTube moment. Any other predictions? What's happening in Nebraska's second district? Do you have any sense? With Kara Eastman?
What? So far, her Republican challenger is basically trying to say that, he's been on the right side of all of these issues, but I'm not really too sure. They've both been making a lot of ads on the YouTube, and but out here in the third, they're not trying to target us.
Fair enough. What else you got? Is that your only prediction?
I do predict that the debate will change nothing, with most of the hardcore people believing each side has won. However, I do think Trump is going to have more gaffes than Biden. Just looking at Biden lately, I think they've figured out whatever cocktail is working. And, well, I just think there's going to be a lot for Biden to just simply point out, this dude is completely incompetent. He screwed all of this up for you. I'm friendly Joe, that sort of thing.
Right.
On the whole, I think Biden will win. But for most of Trump's hardcore base, that 30% of the country, it's not going to make a difference.
Oh, I agree.
But there was a neighbor of mine that I wanted to tell you about. So
You're breaking up a little bit,
highway.
Kowalski. You're breaking up a little bit.
Is that better?
A little bit.
Okay, I have a neighbor. This will be the last thing I want to say. He lives next to the highway. He has a 5x5 picture of Donald Trump face with a clown nose and clown hair, and it reads, "Elect a clown, expect a circus." Then next to that, Biden, or Nebraskans for Biden sign right next to it, right
Nice.
along the highway. So that dude put a giant target on his back. But he says he doesn't care and tells everyone to just bring it. So
Great.
kudos to him.
All right. Thanks, Kowalski. Appreciate the call. We should say that let's make no mistake. I don't think there's anybody who thinks that you're going to convert any of the hardcore Republican base. But let's just assume we're talking 3% of the voters who are even swayable. Talking over 3 million people, 3.5 million people, maybe 4 million people.
Voters?
Voters. And I mean, you're talking 120 million people are going to vote in this election, and 3%. You're talking 3 million people. We remember we got 3 states where Donald Trump won by 11,000 votes, 20,000 votes, 40,000 votes in those 3 states, and that's the 2016 election story.
Yep.
So,
you're seeing today, like what would normally be the October surprise. I think they're just dumping everything out now. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden just released their taxes, and The Atlantic just posted that a story about Trump privately discussing conservative religious supporters with cynicism and contempt. So they're now throwing everything that they've picked up, all the leaks, all the recordings, whatever it is, out there just to see what sticks. The way that I guess Trump. I think they should have done some of this earlier. I don't know. I don't know what their strategy. I'm pretty concerned about the Biden campaign. Frankly, I think that they've been asleep. I mean, I think they've been resting on their laurels. I don't think in 2016 when they wrote that book, Amy Parnas and Jonathan Allen wrote that book, Shattered. You saw the dysfunction in the campaign there, and it seemed like the dysfunction was causing the hesitance to reach, to invest in certain states over. It doesn't seem like that's the case with Biden. It just literally seems like they're asleep at the wheel. I don't know. I mean, do you have a different feel?
I don't. I think their strategy is to make themselves as invisible as possible. I know, like, Kamala Harris is out there. She is addressing like communities where they're afraid that there wasn't turnout before. I think she's going to like places like Milwaukee and Detroit, and I don't know if she's the person to motivate people to come out and vote. I don't know. It's very hard to tell, right? And I still think the principle of that Martin O'Malley would have won in 2016 more or less holds up. And I think to a certain extent, that's what the Biden campaign believes, that the absence of misogyny, the absence of a huge 30-year cottage industry who demonized Hillary Clinton, the absence of a narrative. Like, okay, so this story about Facebook, right? There were leaked voter files that showed that the Trump organization targeted African-American voters, 3.5 million of them. The real story here is Facebook allows for this type of like micro targeting and suppressing of the vote. What they had in their arsenal was a narrative about Hillary Clinton that they could weaponize. I just don't think they have that same narrative about Joe Biden. Now, you may hear stuff like he's not going to do this and that and this for you. Okay, but there is no, even Corn Pop, like there is no super predator narrative that exists in the same way it did for Hillary Clinton, in part because Joe Biden was the first, like the most prominent guy in the country to say, I'm okay with a black boss. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're trying to cut against, I think, in many respects. Now, that's not going to bring out, the youth vote is not going to come out just based upon that fact, without a doubt. The youth vote is much more, to the left and wants some material benefits. But there is, I think, still enough people out there who are like, Donald Trump is a problem, and there's no reason for me not to go out and vote against him. And that's, I think, their strategy. It's just like, let's not offer any reason for anybody to not vote against Donald Trump.
And historically that works. But something has happened from the time Democrats win in wave years when like Republicans are doing very poorly, whether they have an extraordinary candidate or not. I mean, Bill Clinton, it was a wave year. 2006, when we won back the Congress, wave year. Barack Obama, as exceptional of a candidate as he was still running against the most unpopular president in history at that point. So I think there is some historic precedent to this, but the way that we target elections, the micro-targeting to slice and dice and depress turnout is what the risk here. That is what they're doing is they're putting it all in to one strategy, which could very much backfire based on, he's not a misogynist. Or he's not, Hillary Clinton and misogynists can warm up to him. That is a huge risk.
I agree. I don't know that Joe Biden's capable of anything else, frankly. Like what would it be? I mean, I think
surrogates, for instance, where are the surrogates? They might be worried that a surrogate might open their mouth, but all these people, they have scripts, they know what to say, they can put the right no surrogates. The coordinated campaigns, weak sauce right now. Too many coordinated campaigns across the country are complaining that they're not getting proper resources, and they're speaking up publicly, which is a real big risk, because they're freaking out. We're talking about Democratic Party hacks are going on the record, talking about the lack of resources that they're being provided when they're trying to fight fascism, when they're trying to win these House seats, when they're trying to win Senate seats. So we got a real problem here. There is a lot of money that was raised. And I think, I just really hope that turnout does reflect what we've been seeing the last couple of months. And I think that's the...
Agreed. We're in agreement.
Glad we settled that.
Here is part of the narrative that we're seeing from the right about Joe Biden that I think is actually like, I don't know that it helps in that respect. Like, again, we're talking about, you just made the point. There's a lot of people coming out to vote for against Donald Trump. But what the Trump campaign is going to do is try and find narrow little pockets that they can suppress so that they can win in a surgical victory, essentially, like they did in 2016. Mm-hmm. That's the name of the game here. And that's why, to some extent, I'm voting Biden in a blue state, because if he gets 10 million votes, maybe the shenanigans that will take place in those surgical little victories will be overwhelmed. And it costs me nothing as far as I'm concerned politically. I mean, that's basically it. Here, and I just don't know, I don't see how this feeds into that. Now, maybe they have another quieter game, but this whole thing that Joe Biden's out of his mind.
Oh my God, they're doubling down on it right now.
They're doubling down. We saw earlier in the program, Rudy Giuliani say this. Here is the former White House physician who touted Donald Trump's mental health going on to talk about Biden.
And hiding in his basement, and I would argue probably preparing all summer for the debate.
Well, obviously, Sean, the media is the communications branch for the Democrat Party. I mean, we all know that at this point, and they're just aggressively covering for him. But obviously, something is going on with this man at this point. I mean, he'd keep him locked away for 90% of the time, and then when they have a little window where they think he might be able to put a few sentences together, they break him out. They have him read from a teleprompter, and then as soon as it's over, they just dismiss him right away without taking any questions, unless they're scripted questions that he already has been prepared to answer, that he's already got the answers for. So I think that there's definitely something going on here. I think it's completely reasonable to ask if he's being medicated, because he has had a few times where he's come out and he's looked a little bit more energetic than he's typically looked over the last few months. And it could be he's having good days and bad days, because that's how this cognitive decline, usually happens. It happens, and you will have good days and bad days. But I think it's completely reasonable to ask if he's taking medications to help him with his alertness and his memory. And they certainly would be asking Donald Trump that. I guarantee you, as his former physician, they said they were relentless in their pursuit of me, and anything that might even be conceived as something that that President Trump might have been taking. They wanted all the answers. Yet when it comes to former Vice President Joe Biden, it seems like no one cares. We care, but the press doesn't care.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ronnie Jackson. Good luck in you.
I mean, really?
Did you guys see that ad? I don't know if you covered it. There's a new Trump ad out, and I saw it on YouTube, where they zoom in on all of the teleprompter. It is a crazy and it's paid for by Donald Trump, not some super PAC, not some independent expenditure. It is like there's a reflection in the mirror, and you could see the teleprompter, and they like circle it and zoom in, and then they circle his hand going like this to move the Who cares?
Donald Trump reads from a teleprompter, and so did Barack Obama. I mean, yeah, I think it's just indicative of the trouble that they're having coming up with a narrative, right? I mean, we just had a moment where the Hunter Biden Senate committee investigation basically fell apart. Right. I mean, it ended in a total whimper. Which is not to say that I think that Hunter Biden didn't trade on Joe Biden's name. Of course he did. But their whole political strategy was, 6 to 8 months ago was a function of this, and it's completely gone. So now they're out there going like, the guy reads teleprompters. The guy is, taking performance enhanced. I just don't think that is going to suppress. That is all stuff for their base. Yeah. That is not going to suppress. And there's no voter out there going like, I hate Donald Trump, but Joe Biden, I mean, the guy's using teleprompters and maybe taking Adderall.
Adderall, right. Meanwhile, like, what? I'm sorry. Doesn't Donald Trump take Adderall? Hasn't there been like a real...
I mean, yeah, I just don't think that's going to work. Now, the other issue that Donald Trump has, and I think that Joe Biden's got to bring this up in the debate, I think he's got to do it in a throwaway way, though. I think just like you pay $750 in taxes, congratulations, we're going to give you a medal, that type of thing, where he doesn't get too deep into it, where he can say like, there are guys, Donald Trump, who are working on an assembly line in Ohio or in Michigan. How is it they're paying more in taxes than you? Or I would say something to the effect of like, look, I know I got to spend some time primping, but $70,000 on your hair? Isn't that a lot? Like, what are you weaving that with gold? That type of thing I think is called for. But here is Tucker Carlson, the conservative populist, the guy who cares about the little guy, defending Trump's tax avoidance. There's a bunch of other fraud, I think, that's associated in the story. We're going to hear more. But here is Tucker Carlson, the voice of the people.
The second takeaway from the piece is that in some years, Donald Trump paid a strikingly low effective federal tax rate, probably lower than the rate you are now paying. Trump's accountants took advantage of the many provisions in our tax code to make that possible. What the president did was legal. In fact, it's all but universal among the affluent who earn their money from investments rather than from salaries. Should the president have used these conventional tax loopholes to his own benefit? We'll leave that question to the professional hyperventilators on the other channels. They're probably talking about it right now. In fact, of course they are. But far more interesting is this question. Why does our tax code remain so obviously, so grotesquely unfair? Billionaires should not be paying a lower rate than you are paying, no matter who they are, no matter who the president is. The main problem with America right now is that a shrinking group of people controls a growing share of our nation's wealth and power. America is lopsided, and it's getting more lopsided every year. That makes our country unstable. Lopsidedness is why a dozen left-wing tech oligarchs can decide what you're allowed to say and think.
Oh, boy.
It's why young people seem so hopeless and nihilistic, why so many of them are not starting families. It's why some of them are breaking things in the streets. It's why your grandchildren will almost certainly earn less than you do. And by the way, it's also why Donald Trump got elected 4 years ago. Americans could feel that something was profoundly wrong with the way our country was structured. Suddenly, it didn't feel like we were all in this together. It seemed clear that the people in charge were in it for themselves. So to fix it, voters went outside the system. 4 years later, some good things have happened. But the core drivers of the crisis that we face, a dying middle class and the growing hegemony of billionaires, remain unresolved. This is not a small problem. If we don't fix it soon...
All right, what's fascinating about this is you and I could deliver that same critique. But what he's not doing for his audience is to say, that's why Donald Trump got elected. I don't know if that's true or not, but let's just stipulate in Tucker Carlson's world that it is true. That's why Donald Trump got elected. The next thing you would expect out of someone who is actually honest with their audience would say is, and that's a failure of Donald Trump. They did. The one thing that they did pass was tax reform, and they left. Not only did they leave that dynamic intact, they enhanced that dynamic, and he enhanced it for himself. A actual non-role play conservative populist, if that one could exist, which I don't think could, would say, you may have voted for Donald Trump because of that. And then what he did is he screwed you over.
Right.
He made the tax code even more lopsided. He dropped, he dropped capital gains. He said if you're incorporated, you get more money. He basically said, lower the tax rate for the highest earners. You got screwed again by Donald Trump. But instead, what Tucker does is make it as if it's somewhere like it's all in the passive voice when it comes to actually somebody doing this. And this is a guy who tomorrow night will be moaning the idea that we're going to raise taxes on wealthy people.
But this is, a lot of reporting recently shows the direct line that Tucker Carlson has with Donald Trump, which is horrifying because it sounds like he is writing the spin on this because then it was mimicked by Ann Coulter. And she added that line. I don't know if you guys saw that tweet line at the end saying, we're basically like, why didn't Democrats do anything?
Right.
It's.
Well, this is what Joe Biden has to do. I mean,
yes.
in 2016, Donald Trump could say, when Hillary Clinton says, you didn't pay any taxes. And he goes, that's because I'm smart. I have my accountants. That's the law. But in 2020, Joe Biden needs to say, this isn't about your accountants. This is about your political party and about what you signed that day when you signed that new tax law that the Republican Party passed. And that tax law benefited you in this way. It benefited all those cronies you're talking about. You were in a position to change this dynamic. And what you did was you enhanced it and grew this dynamic. And that's on you, buddy. You can't blame anybody but you for that. That's what Joe Biden has to say when that comes up. And if Tucker Carlson was anything but a play acting, that he gave a crap about that dynamic, that's what he would say too. And he would actually address the idea of like, why do we have that dynamic? Mm-hmm. It is because of Robert Bork. It's because of the Republican Party and Ronald Reagan, who changed the way that we assessed antitrust in this country. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the taxes that he's promoted, those lower taxes for rich people that he has promoted his entire career. So there you go.
There you go.
Let's go to the IMs. Let's see.
It also just shows, like, while you're doing that, just shows how much this, you're saying, where's the message? When you have TV hosts and TV executives running your messaging of your campaign, you're going to get 24-second soundbite messages, not a thematic message. I mean, they could have easily, if Biden were to attack Trump on the factory worker, there's a great rebuttal to that, which sometimes they say it, but it's not, that's probably the best rebuttal they can make against Biden. And they're too distracted by these other things that are very they appeal to a TV audience. They don't appeal to the swayable audience.
Right. And a TV audience is the one that is the sort of the hardcore fanboys, as it were. Yep. Antifa super soldier. Goddamn, Danarchy outdid himself. Folks, I've only got about 15, 20 minutes. We're going to have to go a little bit short today because I've got to get on a Zoom call with my kids' teachers. So I hope that's not too much information, but there you go. Rabbit from Boston. The video for the Fun Half song is amazing. I was driving when the song started, but had to pull over to view it. Well worth the pause. Indeed.
That's awesome.
Bear at home, me too. Can hear show on hold. Sam, can you have old Matt on the show more? He does some great breakdowns of right-wing conspiracies. Also, what is going on with Stephen Bunnell, a.k.a. Destiny? Seems to me you're ducking him. How am I ducking him? What is going on with him? Pete Boomer Judge. Sam, I just wanted to say you always look like a snack. Love you, you sexy animal. If I ever swung the other way, you'd be my first choice. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Silver Ball Stud. Biden just needs to say to Trump, Mr. President, when I'm president, Even if it takes me my first 100 days, I will pardon you of all your crimes. Boone. Oh.
Ooh. Also, exactly the neoliberal thing to do.
Capable carpet. My attitude is that Biden wins the debate by default unless something goes seriously wrong. Ultimately, though, I don't think the debate will be the thing that changes people's minds. I agree. I think it's more of an opportunity for, people to raise issues about Joe Biden than it is for people to change their minds about Donald Trump. But who knows? Moon in the lake. I'm not optimistic about the debates. Trump could go on stage babbling gibberish and not lose any votes. If Biden did that, he might lose votes. Yeah, they're the risk. Fair, yeah. Yeah, I think that's.
I don't know. Biden did that a lot in the primary. I think he's going to be fine in that department.
Appin, VA. Yeah, I think so. Have you seen that ACB apparently cited a 1905 Jacobson versus Massachusetts to support COVID lockdown in Illinois? Turns out she's for indefinite lockdown and forced vaccination. The Republican electorate should hear more about this. Michigan redneck. 2.5 million Michigan residents have requested an absentee ballot, a 350% increase from 2016. Most recent polls have Biden up 8 or 9 points. I can't believe that's possible. But if it is, we need to pour it on and run up the scoreboard. Just humiliate Trump into oblivion. Jay Chivone. Trump's demand for a Biden drug test while being tweeted to upstage the New York Times tax expose also follows his tried and true tactic of accusing his opponent doing what Trump is actually doing. Trump went early and strong, claiming the Clinton Foundation is corrupt. In a rare exercise of justice, New York State court closed Trump's foundation and barred him and his family from running a charity. Indeed. Trump journalists today are claiming that Biden has refused to allow ear inspection before the debate.
What?
They're claiming that
he's going to have an earpiece in?
Yes.
This is unbelievable.
Yep.
Listen, I have to disagree with you guys. The debate, the primary debate, was a completely different situation. I don't think Biden has room for error at all.
I agree with that. There can't be anything dramatic. Let's put it that way. Right. And really, there doesn't have to be, because Biden's campaign is predicated on offering nothing but not Trump. Mm-hmm. And so in many respects, he just has to come off and just do the opposite of what Donald Trump is doing. Mm-hmm. Even if he says, like, Mr. $750 taxes over here. No, I'm kidding, of course. I understand. You were just following the law. You saw an opportunity to take advantage of everybody out here who's paying taxes to cover you, and you took it. Maybe there's a lot of people out there who wouldn't blame you.
I don't blame you for being that broke. All those lawyers cost a lot of money.
Right. And people are making a big deal about how you owe $1.4 billion. We should all be so lucky. And this whole idea that you're just operating in such a way to enrich yourself because of that, that's up to other people to say.
He's not. He's using the presidency as a cover for him, a legal cover for him not to be penalized, to be gone after. I mean, what was that one line of the New York Times piece? If adding up all the debts, he owes more than any human being, any American in this country. That line stood out to me and should have been at the lead. More than anybody in the United States, Donald Trump would owe more.
On some level, too, it would be funny to say something to the effect of, like, I still remember when Mitt Romney said there were takers and there were makers, and you apparently are a taker. Getting back to the healthcare thing, which I think should come up, I think Joe Biden should talk about Donald Trump has nominated someone who is going to further his goal of destroying the Affordable Care Act, taking away pre-existing conditions from our health care, because that's the thing that everybody likes to talk about. And he's doing it by suing in a federal court. He's doing it by placing someone on the Supreme Court to deal with that, and that is Amy Coney Barrett. Here is Senator Mike Lee basically giving up the goods on ACB, as it were.
What does the appointment confirmation of Judge Barrett as Justice Barrett, if it indeed happens, mean for Roe v. Wade?
Only time can tell what will happen to any one precedent, although I would point out here, George, that anytime someone is looking at overruling a precedent, it's a lot more complicated than people might think. And in any event, you can't look at the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice and boil down that jurist's contribution to the law, past and future, to what they might do with a single case. This judge has an incredible background. This is a judge who will bring her expertise to the table, and it will be brought to bear in a whole wide variety of scenarios, just as Ruth Bader Ginsburg's expertise was brought to bear in her cases.
Including health care. You heard Senator Durbin right there. He says he and all Democrats are united now, concerned that if Judge Barrett is confirmed, the Affordable Care Act and its protections for people with pre-existing conditions will go down as well. Are they valid concern?
Look, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was, I believe, unconstitutional when it was enacted. It was unconstitutional when it was litigated in 2012. It was unconstitutional when Chief Justice Roberts, writing for a narrow 5-member majority, rewrote the Affordable Care Act in 2 critical ways in order to render an otherwise inevitably unconstitutional law constitutional. And so the fact that Congress chose to enact an unconstitutional law shouldn't tarnish Judge Barrett in this. Her job is to figure out whether it's unconstitutional or not. I don't believe it is. John Roberts rewrote it twice in order to make it appear constitutional, which it is not.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Some
what a
mental gymnastics there.
Yeah, no kidding, right? First off, it shows that they're terrified at the idea that that she does represent the end to Roe v. Wade, or at the very least, enough of an assault on it that we're going to have 25 states in this country where abortion will be outlawed. And then he has this like incredibly tortured response where he says Congress enacted an unconstitutional law, and then blows right through the fact and the body that we that our Constitution requires to assess whether it's unconstitutional also found that it was constitutional, but they did it in a wrong fashion.
John Roberts wrote his opinion said this, so therefore, oh my God.
But however, I hope that she is going to invalidate the law. I mean, I think that is.
But you can't judge her on her past or future rulings. I'm just going to confirm her because I'm pretty sure and hopeful that she will overrule this unconstitutional law we passed.
It's sort of fascinating that he's taking that tact with the ACA after the entire history of this thing. The Republicans have not been able to kill it and desperately tried to multiple times.
Do you notice how they've pulled away from the small business, just the attack on small business? How it's stretching small businesses. Remember that was the message the first time around. I think the first attack they made on it, but they're completely abandoning that and they're going all in because the alternative is okay, great, pass something else, but
right.
Instead it's unconstitutional.
Well, that's the thing I think that at one point I hope Joe Biden brings up tonight is that like everything you're talking about, you're acting as if you were not the president for the past 4 years. Now people could make that mistake because of the way you've handled the coronavirus. It really does feel like you're not the president. But the fact is you signed the tax law. You signed, you were upset about your Republican Party not being able to gut the ACA and get rid of pre-existing conditions. You're in the driver's seat, buddy. And you're sitting around going like, who drove the car into the ditch? Look in the mirror. I mean, I think that has to be sort of what Joe Biden does. I like, look, and I will remind everybody, I would have preferred a candidate who gets up there and not only says stuff like that, but then says, and here's how we drive the car straight. Joe Biden's not that guy. He doesn't. And I would also argue that when he's talking about driving the car, that it feels like he's staying in the ditch a little bit to me, but that's their strategy. That's what they're sticking to it. And if you're going to pursue that strategy, there are ways of doing it. And you should get judged on both accounts, really. But at this point, like, how well are they fulfilling their own strategy of being just not Donald Trump? And there are ways of doing that, I think.
I mean, he could easily say, like you said, so imagine you've had COVID, you've had COVID-related illnesses. I'll even give him that line. If you had access to healthcare, if you had pre-existing conditions, imagine if you were banned from receiving healthcare during this time. How many more deaths would there have been? I mean, there's a lot there's a lot to work with. I think the danger is Joe Biden might go into an area where, like, if he goes into labor, which he should really be pushing towards, they've been hitting him hard on these big trade deals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big time. All right. Lastly, let's play this clip. This is not so much in the news, but it is exciting. Do you know the Gravel Institute?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Tell us about the Gravel Institute.
Mike Gravel, former senator, ran for president in 2008, I believe. He ran this time around, tried to get on stage. He had the Gravel teens that urged him to run. And he has been a large critic on our military-industrial complex. He decided to take
the Pentagon Papers on
air.
The Senate of the floor of the Senate, which allowed them to be admitted into the record
from Alaska, of all places. So these kids discovered him, and they were able to build a pretty strong following, and they decided to launch this institute, and now they're taking on Prager University.
Yes.
And it was awesome on Twitter. I don't know if you guys saw the debate between the Gravel kids, essentially, and Prager University. But Prager University, it was trending yesterday, and they got spicy with Gravel, and Gravel told them to shut the F up. And it was awesome.
Well, and the Gravel Institute is, sort of like, not unlike sort of what we do to a certain extent, but they're going out specifically to combat for young people's, to sort of be a corrective for something like PragerU, right?
Yeah.
And so this is really exciting because someone who, I've known for quite some time is helping them out. And also they mentioned Michael in this. So check this out. This is pretty exciting.
Hi, this is H. John Benjamin. I'm here to talk to you about a big problem on the internet. It's called people emailing my wife. No, it's called PragerU. Imagine a huge stream of lies that pours into every computer in America. Imagine it's disguised to look unbiased and packaged into slick videos. And imagine oil billionaires give them tens of millions each year to indoctrinate your friends, your family. Well, that's PragerU. And the thing is, it works. 1 out of every 3 Americans online has seen one of their videos, and 70% say that Prager's videos changed their minds. This stuff makes a difference, and every day it is pulling people toward the right. At the Gravel Institute, we're building something to beat them at their own game. Short, high-quality, easy-to-understand videos presenting leftist ideas and refuting right-wing lies. Stuff you can send to your friends, your mothers, your secret lovers, your mother's lovers, your known lovers. Oh, and we've got big-name presenters from Bernie Sanders to Chelsea Manning. Here are a few that we've lined up. Okay, so this won't be easy, and we're going against a Goliath, so we definitely need your help. We want this to be a collaborative organization guided by its members, where we're trying to do something big. So hey, let's do this.
Then it invites you to become a patron to support their mission. And they write at the end of it in honor of Michael Brooks.
Very sweet.
Very sweet. So check that out, folks. Exciting stuff. All right. I got to wrap stuff up here. I'm sorry, callers. We didn't get to many calls at all today, of course. That's the noise that says, sorry. That's if you were to write lyrics to that noise. They would be, sorry, gotta go. I'm feeling it today. All right, let's...
little too much CBD today.
And we should say this is not... The Gravel Institute is not... They just named themselves after Gravel. They're not associated, I think, with him in any type of like... are they? I mean, aren't they?
I think they are. I thought they were... he's speaking.
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure what the relationship is.
But... I don't know if it's like a C3. I don't know how it's structured, but...
Right.
Interesting.
All right. Let's a couple of items and then we're out of here. Bassman drove through South Dakota at the end of June. Little evidence COVID even existed. Maybe 5% wearing masks. Retail workers not wearing masks and gloves. Even food service workers. Pathetic. Yeah, now it just exploded. Something Sam can pronounce. MR on Thursdays is watching a band live, getting better and better the more shows they play. Miss you, Michael. Bravo-matic. Someone on Twitter wisely asserted that Biden should begin each response tonight by saying, well, that is the $750 question. That's pretty
Well, that's kind of like the Ilhan Omar tweet. Did you see the one where Deal or No Deal, they had one of the models like flip and it was $750 and
oh, that's funny. Samuel Cedar on IM. Hey, Sam, why you never plugged Ring of Fire on the Majority Report? In fact, only by coincidence, I got to know that you have another awesome podcast. Yeah, I got to get better on that. I do. Disco Stew. The Biden campaign dropping Oppo now is good because it sucks up the media oxygen on the Trump scandals, so there's less time for Trump to sling crap, as it were.
Good point.
Matt, sell us Wallace. Can I get calls and texts nearly every day for voting, early voting for Joe Biden in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale. Kowalski, forgot to say, latest polls show Omaha is in play to give one electoral vote to Biden. Omaha, please vote. Biden winning with 271 because of Omaha goes blue would be amazing. Stay safe, everyone. Right, and that is that's Easton's district, isn't it? Eastman's. All right, 3 more of these. Keister. Please consider Adam Christensen, Florida, a very progressive Zoomer set to Yoho's vacated seat. Island full of noises. Sam, as a black voter, I think there's a push in the black community to not vote for Biden because of the crime bill and Kamala because of her prosecution record. Yeah. I see these ads or comments all over social media in black communities and spaces. Not sure if it's bots or actual voters, but it's concerning. That's probably, what they're going to be pushing.
Yep.
And the question is, how effective is that? That was certainly a redo of the strategy from 2016.
And it's why they didn't go after BLM. They went after Antifa.
Right. A Square, thank God you're doing your show during the debate. No other way to watch. I like Danarchy new video, except way too much Mad King. Great interview today, Sam, and continuing the thread of Reconstruction and the failures. Amazing and depressing to find strategy used by Republicans have only modernized slightly. And the final IM of the day. Dummy Door, do you have any resources about how our trade agreements cede national sovereignty to trade dispute panels, effectively giving corporations the power to control the policies of many developing countries and undermine democratic levers of power? That was it is called the International Dispute.
Investor State Dispute.
Yes, ISDS, the Investor State Dispute.
Like system, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. ISDS or something. And it is part of NAFTA, but it was a big part of the TPP. But you see it in that context. And you can go and Lori Wallach, Google Lori Wallach. She wrote extensively about this in the years that run up to the TPP. Also, thanks for your debunking of the dumb left. My professor influences the class to think that nothing matters and Trump will actually be better for leftists because it will bring in the revolution. He cites the existence of the squad under Trump as evidence. It's nice to be able to push back. Let me just say this. There is no evidence that a guy like Crowley is going to lose in that district because of Donald Trump.
Right.
On the contrary, AOC ran because of Bernie Sanders, not because of Donald Trump. She was, if anything, Donald Trump was a distraction on some level. We would be seeing this regardless of Trump, I believe. What we wouldn't be seeing maybe would be, suburban women mobilizing non-ideological. They're not part of that ideological split in the Democratic Party. They're out there voting against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
AOC, the squad, that was a function of what's happening in the Democratic Party and is in many respects existing and happening irregardless of Donald Trump. It's hard to say which would have been more power, but the squad does not owe its existence to Donald Trump. It owes its existence in many respects to Bernie Sanders. Yeah. And that was the reality one way or another.
She didn't even bring him up during the election. I mean, it was all about the Democratic Party machine. I mean, it was hyper local, like lawyers in the district making money off the machine. I mean, that's what she focused on.
Yep.
And also how asleep they were.
Yep.
Can I just share one thing before we go?
Yep.
I just got an email from a Republican Trump didn't do anything illegal. Maybe Biden should have fixed the tax holes and allowed for Trump to get such great benefits. Maybe Biden failed to do his job. # reality check. It's penetrating.
Yeah, and people are upset about it, but the bottom line is, like, you're going to blame Joe Biden for what took place 5 years ago as vice president? I think what you need to do is look at the last time the taxes were reformed, and and that's all that Biden's got to say. You know, you're talk about passing the buck.
Yeah.
Talk about passing the $750. All right, folks. See you tomorrow. Check Nomi out at 3. Check me out at I'll be on streaming somewhere about the debate tonight.
Twitch.
Bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my